Today's sermon is entitled The Humanity of Christ. Who here would identify as an introvert? There's a couple of us at least, anyway. So I'm wondering for all of us introverts out there, have you ever had a day where there were lots and lots of people just making demands on you for the entire day? Whether it was on the phone, in person, by text, email, or social media. And by the end of the day, all you want to do is escape the maddening crowd. You want some time out, some serious time out, space to breathe and just be you. Maybe the extroverts out there have also experienced that occasionally. But I'm imagining this is exactly where Jesus is in this Mark passage. He's just come off the back of healings and teachings and the calming of storms and the feeding of thousands of people who had just followed him into the middle of nowhere to listen to him preach. And it didn't matter whether he was in Nazareth or Gennesaret, Bethsaida, or any of the villages in between. People constantly were following him and asking for healings and clarification on teachings. And here we find Jesus. It's like he just needs some time out. Our passage starts with Jesus heading away to the region of Tyre. And then he enters a house where he didn't want anyone to know that he was there. And yet the Message version says he was barely inside the house when a woman who had a disturbed daughter turns up and kneels at his feet, begging for help. And I'm kind of imagining Jesus thinking, for the love of God our Father, could I just have a few minutes peace, please? Well, at least that's what I'd be thinking. And I'd be like, I'm happy to help, but I just need a break first. The woman who is described as a Syrophoenician woman, which basically means a Gentile who speaks Greek, she's the one that begs Jesus to cast a demon out of her daughter. And the next bit, I think, is possibly the worst thing that Jesus is reported doing or saying in the entire New Testament. It's like he embraces the worst bits of his humanity and he says, let the children be fed first, for it is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs. Commentator John Markley suggests that Jesus' ministry was to be focused on the Jews only, and that they are the children in which he's referring to in his little speech. The Jews are the children of God. And apparently, in Jesus' day, there was a common disparaging term for Gentiles amongst the Jews. And that was to call them dogs, as dogs were akin to being unclean swine or pigs, which they couldn't eat. They considered that animal to be unclean. So in other words, Jesus is being basically outright racist here. The Jesus who is both 100% divine God and 100% human seems to be just operating fully out of his humanity here. I mean, his comments are outrageous in our day and age. Like, why would Jesus, who was meant to unconditionally love everyone, say that to this poor woman who just happens to be not Jewish by birth? I mean, didn't Jesus come to save all people, fundamentally? John Markley suggests that it was really the commissioning of the disciples by Jesus that really opens up the ministry to all people for Christ. Yet for me, this justification for Jesus' actions still doesn't sit that great with me. I'm pacing myself this week. I had a coughing fit last week. I think it's fair to say that Jesus stuffed up here. He made a human mistake and should never have said these things about this poor woman, no matter how he cushioned it, as he actually uses the Greek word kunaroion, which is the diminutive word for dog. In other words, he just kind of calls her a little dog. Kind of softens it, but still not that nice, I think. In Kierkegaard's philosophical fragments, it suggested that Christ is the ultimate paradox. At the same time, he is 100% God, which is perfectly good, wise, and powerful. Yet he is also 100% human, which is burdened by sin, limited goodness, limited knowledge, and limited understanding. Jesus here is definitely limited in his goodness. He seems to be limited by his time's understanding and prejudice, and therefore it limits his goodness towards the Syrophoenician woman. He is downright rude and racist to her. Yet the woman's quick wit and retort gets Jesus' attention and seems to snap Jesus out of his limited humanity back into his divinity. And she says, "Even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs." He changes his mind and then says, "For saying that, you may go. The demon has left your daughter." The message says Jesus was impressed and says, "You're right." And yes, when this woman gets home, her child is indeed better. Jesus essentially admits that she was right and heals her daughter, even though he was potentially exhausted and wanting a break. Jesus admits his brokenness and his humanity here. He is gracious enough to admit that he is wrong and to grant her request. In the next story in Mark, it is of Jesus healing a man who is deaf and unable to speak. The interesting thing is that Jesus takes him away to heal him in private. Jesus is wanting to keep a low profile. I suspect his humanity was scared of the repercussions of being seen by the teachers of the law sooner than he needed to be. He knows the end and he just doesn't want it to happen any sooner than it needs to be. He wants to maximize his time here on earth. He doesn't want to die, at least not yet. The author of Mark then comments that Jesus asked them to keep the healings on the lowdown. Like, don't tell anyone. Yet the more he ordered them to not say anything, the more zealous the people were in telling everyone. I mean, it's hard to keep good news on the down low, isn't it? Well, the God side of Jesus may well have known that it was what they would do, despite the request to the Father to not have to go through with this crucifixion. I suspect the human side of Jesus was still desiring to fly under the radar of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, so that he didn't have to face his death any earlier than he needed. Kierkegaard suggests that the precise nature of Christ's hypostatic or mystical union, that is being both 100% human and 100% God, all at once, is beyond our human understanding. For us today, I think it's easy for us to just see Jesus as 100% divine, doing all these amazing things. But it's a lot harder for us to imagine him making mistakes and being fallibly human. In other words, being a little less godly. But I know that I can relate to being overwhelmed and overworked by people. I can relate to the desire to run away, and I can relate to the need to keep a low profile to try and save my own neck. Maybe what we need to do is to lean more into seeing Jesus as a fallible human being, one that is tired and grumpy and snaps at this woman, something that was very common in his day, but not at all godlike or kind. Maybe seeing Christ's humanity in all its ugliness can help us recognize our own flaws and help us see when we mistreat other people. By dehumanizing people, by calling them animal names, helps us to not think of these people groups as being human. In the book America's Unholy Ghosts by Joel Gozer, it suggests that the reason America's founding fathers, who were slave traders and slave masters in their own rights, were able to say wholeheartedly that they believed that all humans were made equally is because they didn't believe that black people, in other words their slaves, were indeed human. They were a subspecies in their head, and therefore this is what got them out of having to treat them with respect and dignity that they gave to white folks. So I believe today that we are called to see and accept Christ's fallibility and his imperfections as a human. That we are called to be godly and treat people with way more kindness and respect than Christ did here. But that we are to use this as a mirror, as a way of reflecting on the ways that we haven't treated our fellow humans with respect and dignity that they deserve. Have we been guilty of dehumanizing them? Is it much easier to be mean and nasty to people if we don't engage with their feelings? Maybe we need to remind ourselves that every annoying human being under the sun also has feelings and is made in the image of God and deserves our unconditional love and respect. And maybe we can learn from Christ and not make the same mistakes he did.